What is going on, USFL fans? We got Zander in the building, Lowe in the building.
Stepping in for Webb and Ace once again.
Yeah, that's kind of what we do. So today we are going to kind of recap the 2023 season, USFL season that is.
Bittersweet came to an end pretty quick. Feels like season just started.
It's crazy because I was, counting down the days, making content throughout the off season. Like, man, I just want the season to be back, and then bam, it's gone like that. It's crazy, so crazy.
So we just kind of wanted to talk to you all about what the storylines were going into the season, kind of what they were at the middle point of the season, and then how we finished up in the championship with the Stallions getting the back-to-back championship, and then kind of rolling into the off season.
Yeah, it's pretty much. I mean, headed into the season, we had this was the first off season that we had seen in a spring football league, because we all know it. The XFL, in 2020 didn't finish season.
Had the COVID after 5 weeks or whatever.
AAF didn't finish a season. So, this is kind of the first time, and we didn't know what to expect. We saw Larry Fedora step down. We saw Kevin Sumlin leave. We saw Jeff Fisher step down.
A lot of coaching changes.
We saw Kirby Wilson step down. I did not imagine 4 head coaching changes heading into the season. We saw players leave for the NFL. Some of them came back. Some of them left to
the XFL.
The land of darkness. No, I'm kidding. No, but we saw a lot of different stuff during the offseason. So, kind of headed in the season. Some of the things were, the Birmingham Stallions had won a championship. So, but they kind of had flip-flopped QB a little bit towards the end. So, who was going to be the starter?
Was it going to be Jamar, who coming back was a starter majority of last season, or is it going to be who finished out in the championship game the previous year with Alex, and they started with Jamar in game 1, and then kind of like last year when they started with Alex first game of the season, he got hurt. Jamar came in game 1 of this year. Jamar got hurt, broke his finger, and then Alex came in, and it was kind of rest his history after that.
Yeah. And not only that, we had, the Maulers and the Breakers playing each other, which was kind of a weird game because the Maulers had a new head coach. They looked a little different. They added Reuben Foster, and, a lot of people were picking them to make the playoffs and, thinking
they 1-9 last year. I mean,
yeah, they went 1-9 and, they made the coaching change, added some players. And, some people were picking them to make the playoffs. They changed their QB room a lot. And then also
had brought in James Morgan and then Troy Williams.
Yeah, exactly. And then the Breakers were, they added Coach Flip and added McLeod Bethel Thompson as well as some other players. So that game had a lot of storylines and kind of just didn't know where to go with that game, But
that game started out pretty slow with Bethel Thompson filling his way in with the new Coach Flip offense. Coach Flip was obviously the QB coach for the Philadelphia Eagles when they won the Super Bowl with Nick Foles. So he had a lot of experience with QBs. And towards the end of that first game with the Breakers, MBT kind of put up solid numbers. And then they got hot real quick and the offense started rolling. And they were kind of the team to beat coming out of the gates pretty quick at the beginning of the season after they beat the Stallions early in the year.
Yeah, they started off 4-0, league-leading passer, rusher, receiver. They looked like they were primed to be a historic spring offense. And then on the flip side of that, no pun intended, you had, teams like the Gamblers that started 0-2 and the Showboats that started 0-3. And Philly started off kind of rough. I think they started 1-3, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on that. Either 1-3, something like that.
And I will say from last year, there was such a gap between the best team in the league. And then you had the Panthers and the Maulers. I mean, Panthers were 2-8 last year. Maulers were 1-9.
Yeah.
And then this year had a lot more parity. I mean, in the North, just in general this year, we had 3 teams at 4-6, 1 at 3-7. And then the South was where it was all bunched up also with the Stallions 8-2, the Breakers 7-3, and then the Gamblers and the Showboats both split in 5-5. So there was a lot more parity this season rather than a wide gap like last season where it was pretty much the top dogs and then the bottom feeders, and then wasn't really much anything in between. It was you were either great or you were terrible last year. The gap was closed a lot more, which made for better football this year, in my opinion.
Yeah, and the North was at the midway point. I remember talking about this on the radio. New Jersey was 3-2, and then everybody else was 2-3. And then in the South, I don't remember exactly what it was, but I think Memphis was 2-3, and then I think Houston was 3-2. New Orleans was 4-1, and Birmingham was 3-2. So like the
3-2.
entire league, halfway through the season, the entire league was close. And you know, we had some moving around. New Jersey ended up kind of losing.
Tailing
I
off.
think the rest of their games, they lost their last 5, I believe, or 6, something like that.
Well, they won week 9 over the Stars, which the Stars had a win in your end game, and the Stars came out and won that game. And then that was DeAndre Johnson's first game back after missing 3 in a row for injury. And then very next.
You're right, because not to cut you off, but everybody was 2-3 in the North. That's what it was. Everybody was 2-3 in the North. That's right. You're right. You're right.
Yeah, because they had lost the 3 straight games that Johnson went out for injury, and that was when the Generals were swapping in Lauletta and Prukup at quarterback, and then whenever DJ came back playing against the Stars, they came out and they put up like 38 points and beat the Stars, and that was like the crazy back and forth shootout.
That was a weird one.
That was the Stars' first of the 2 winning their end games, and then they ended up losing the very next week to the Panthers. So, I mean, they kind of blew it down the stretch too when they were in the championship last year. So, and they kept Case Cookis, who was one of the top QBs in the league last year. And that's another thing we talked about this year. We both were saying pre-show that the QB play this season was a lot more consistent than last season.
Yeah. Philly, to touch on that point, Philly was 4-3. And they started to look like that North team that was going to finally like kind of separate themselves a little bit, maybe get to 7-3, 6-4, something like that. And they kind of just didn't do it. It was weird. And it's even more weird. And it's a team game, but I trusted Case Cookis more than any QB in the North at that point. So I was certain that they would, get at least one more win and be in for sure and have a 500 record. But it just
as soon as they lost their left tackle was like the second to last drive of week 9 against the Generals. I mean, Case had 0 protection and he was just getting absolutely killed out there. And I mean, if he's not an extremely mobile QB. So if he's not protecting the pocket, he couldn't get the ball to the receivers like Corey Coleman and Gray on the outside. So, I mean, yeah, he was hot there for a while, but like we always talk about in these spring leagues, I mean, you need to have at least some consistency in your O-line or your quarterback's just going to get killed out there unless they're just crazy athletic and get out of the pocket and can escape pressure to get the ball into the receiver's hands.
Yeah, and I said this the other day, but, a lot of it kind of reminds me of, and some people that watch this may be like me, like an LSU fan, because I know some of my Breaker fans watch this stuff. But if anybody watched, like, even if you only watched like the Florida State LSU game early on last year, it was like that. The LSU offensive line was like kind of thrown together, and they could not block very well. And Jaden Daniels running like saved the day. And I feel like that kind of translates to a league like the USFL, where a lot of the offensive linemen, I mean, nothing against any offensive lineman in this league, but, it's hard to find good offensive linemen in general, like for the NFL. So a lot of the best are taken up and they're on practice squads and game day rosters.
Because, I mean, linemen rotate so much in and out. So
yeah, exactly. So it's hard to find. I mean, there's not a whole lot of 6'6", 380-pound dudes just sitting around, like, you know what I mean? So I get it's not easy. So, teams like guys like Magoo and even to a degree, Troy Williams. Like Troy Williams reminded me a lot of Jaden Daniels this year in a sense that a lot of times when they would need something offensively and they were struggling, the running game couldn't get going, the receivers were maybe not getting open as much, line wasn't blocking as well. I feel like they always kind of had Troy Williams' running ability to kind of fall back on a little bit.
I mean, he was the Maulers' best rusher. I mean, he was the quarterback, and he was pretty much their only offensive run game majority of the season.
Yeah.
So
And we even saw Michigan move to EJ Perry in a make or break game and also in a playoff game.
he played great. I
And
mean, because
part
he
of
had
it was
legs.
because he was more mobile, and that helped him. Because it's like if you're a pocket passer and you're trying to settle into a game and nothing is there, it kind of gets rough. You either got to check it down or throw it away. But if you're mobile and nothing is working, at least early on you can run and pick up some yards and things like that, kind of keep the drive moving, get a little momentum, and then
Pick up some first down with your legs. Yeah.
when they start to come down, that's when you see those passing lanes kind of open up for you. So yeah, being mobile in this league, we saw a lot more of that this year, and it helped. It helped some of these teams, especially the Maulers. It probably helped keep them alive because if they would have started James Morgan all year, they probably would have went 1-9 or 2-8 again.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, because he doesn't have any mobility. I mean, he is a true pocket passer and does not like to scramble and can't avoid the rush really well. He's got to be protected back there in order to hit receivers down the field. So, I mean,
yeah,
like you said, majority. I mean, besides your quarterback, MBT on the Breakers, the best teams had mobile quarterbacks. I mean, simple as that.
yeah, it's pretty much what it was.
The two teams that made it to the championship both had mobile quarterbacks that
Yeah,
could
they did.
get out of
I
the
think
pocket.
McLeod was kind of the exception. Also, just because, being 35, like, he's a veteran. He's been around the block. You know what I mean? You're not 35 playing pro football if you can't do something right. You know what I mean?
I mean, won a couple MVPs over in the CFL, won a championship over in the CFL. So, yeah, I mean, he's
Yeah.
been
So,
on multiple NFL rosters and practice squads. So, yeah, I mean, he did have a lot of experience that some of these other guys in this USFL didn't have. But, yeah, he
yeah.
was the exception. He was not a mobile
Right.
quarterback, but he got
Right.
it done.
Yeah. But yeah, late down the stretch in the season, we saw New Orleans started to look out of it for a minute. It got to a point where
It was gamblers and breakers and
everybody was 5-3
yeah, they
or
were
four and
all.
three,
I think they were.
five
I
and
think.
three.
I think they were all 5-3. Yeah,
They were all 5-3, and
and the
um,
Stallions were 6-2 at that point. So I mean,
yeah,
it was anyone's ball game in the South.
and and we saw New Orleans kind of come back to life a little bit after dropping the 3 games in a row.
Mhm.
They had pretty much two winner go home playoff games really against Memphis and Houston. We saw them kind of get their stuff together. And then late in the season as well, we saw Pittsburgh handle their business and help themselves to be the 1 seed. They were able to take care of business against Michigan in week 9. And then in week 10, they beat New Jersey, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, they beat New Jersey. They got in.
And they beat the
Michigan,
Panthers' first game of the playoffs. I mean,
yeah,
Maulers got
Michigan,
hot at the right time.
they did. And Michigan was also kind of able to get into, they switched QBs in week 10 in a winner go home game, and they got it done. I think that was their first home win too, which
That
was
was their first home run in
kind
Ford
of
Field.
crazy, kind of weird, but all right.
They
So
needed a win in the home field. I mean, the fans kept showing up in Detroit at Ford Field, and they just kept losing early on. So it was cool to see them finally get a win at home because, like you said,
yeah,
all their other wins were on the road this season.
yeah, and a little bit off topic a little bit, but going into next year, I think Michigan will kind of continue to get a little bit better, especially if they bring back EJ Perry and let him kind of settle in because they got weapons, man. They do. They got some good weapons in Michigan. But adding that mobility and stuff, I
Quinn,
think,
Walker,
yeah,
Hicatini. I mean, Reggie
Corbin,
Corbin. Yeah, I mean, they got. I mean, they on paper they should be a very good team just because of the names
yeah,
that they got.
they should be with their defense and the weapons they have. That team should be 5-5 minimum.
Yeah, with
And
with Breland
And
Speaks and Frank Ginda.
yeah, and I think depending on what happens with Pittsburgh, we'll see. Like I said, it's a weird offseason. You never know. Coaching changes happen. You never know if a coach decides to leave. Does Jaron Horton get the next job? Could that maybe affect things in Pittsburgh, or does he get to stay and they kind of get to build on it? Do they go get a new offensive coordinator? There's a lot of things that can happen.
I feel like the Maulers definitely should get a new offensive coordinator. They just look so flat, and they threw quick slants and quick outs the whole year, never threw anything over the top. So it was hard to really get chunk plays. And like me and you were at the championship game, that first drive of the championship, I mean, it was like a 20-play, 12-minute drive, something crazy. And I mean, because they just were like getting 3-4 yards at a time, and that's hard to sustain as an offense, constantly trying to, complete multiple passes for short yardage for whole games.
Especially if you're an offense with a struggling offensive line and you don't relative to the rest of the league, Pittsburgh doesn't have like the best weapons, right? Like they've got a solid room of weapons, but it's like nothing crazy. Like it's not on the Michigan level or the Birmingham level.
Yeah, I mean, Isaiah Henney's fine.
No, they've got some
Hyman's
solid
got,
players, but
yeah.
holistically, as far as weapons go, they're not on the level of some of these other teams. But if they can kind of maybe bring in a new offensive mind and maybe change some things up and see if something different happens with it, that could be nice for them.
They got to fix their run game for sure this offseason. I mean, like me and you both said, it was Troy Williams that was their entire, running offense, and you don't want that as your quarterback 24/7 taking the pounding and stuff like that.
No, yeah, I think they should look to bring in another. I know they signed a guy late in the year. I think they should look to bring in a fourth running back going into camp and just kind of see what maybe somebody can do. But anyway, we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves at that point. Let's see. We got to the playoffs, and the first playoff game was Pittsburgh and Michigan, which was one of the better games of the season.
It was a back and forth, crazy overtime game that we talked about a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, it was a super fun game. It got pretty good ratings too, and
I think
like
it was in the 900,000 or close to 900,000.
Yeah, and then we had the Birmingham game, which was good for a quarter. It was good a little bit into the second quarter.
The Stallions Breakers game.
Yeah, it was still close, and then the Stallions kind of just started pulling away, and the Breakers scored some late touchdowns, but it didn't really matter at that point. That game kind of wasn't what the league wanted. Really wasn't what anybody wanted. Everybody wanted a close game, whether you're a fan of Birmingham or not. So
yeah.
But
so yeah, that's kind of what led us into last week, us making the road trip to Canton.
Yeah, it was fun. It was a blast. I got to go up there, got to meet you. I got to meet a couple new people in the community. I hadn't experienced the championship. Like, I went to the championship game in year one, but I didn't get to experience it from a media standpoint, as in, being on the field,
being in the press box,
the post game press conference stuff, being on the field after the win with the
championship,
with the fireworks and all that stuff. And it's a blast, man. It's a blast.
Seeing Lou Holtz on the field, obviously.
Yeah, I didn't have that on my bingo card. I didn't even know he was there until later on in the game when somebody said something, and I was like, "What?"
Yeah, but that was crazy. I mean,
yeah,
legend right there.
The game itself was good for the most part. I think kind of late in the game it got a little. I think really the turning point in the game, the part of the game that I thought to myself, I think this is actually over, which I tend to say that a lot. But the point of the game where Pittsburgh caused Magoo to fumble, Reuben Foster caused Magoo to fumble, and the defensive tackle kind of picked it up and was running downfield, and he was going to get caught. I think Magoo was like catching up real quick.
It was around the 30-yard line.
Yeah.
It was around the opposite 30, yeah.
They handed it forward to number 3. I think it's Tarpley, maybe.
Which was like an illegal forward pass.
And then so they gave them the ball at the 28, and they ended up ultimately missing the field goal, which kept it at 21-12. I think that was really the point in the game where I
Oh,
was
that
like,
was backbreaking. That was, I mean,
yeah, that
I
was the
know
point.
Coach Horton said after in the press conference that we were at, he was saying, hey, we can't blame ourselves for that penalty because the offense did not move the ball like we had the opportunity. But I mean, like you said, that was an absolute backbreaker when they took 7 points off the board because it could have been
Yeah.
19-21, went back to 12-21. The offense went 3 and out, and then they missed like the 40-yard field goal wide left. So, I mean, and then after that, the Stallions went down and they scored again and it put it to the 28-12. And I mean, the Maulers had 4 field goals. The Stallions had 4 touchdowns. You can't win these big games if you're kicking field goals like the Maulers were majority of the season. So,
Yeah, and that was something that I had kind of touched on last week before when we recorded before the championship game, was that, you cannot, it doesn't matter how good your defense is. If you can't score a touchdown or 2 against a team like the Stallions, you're just not going to win. And it ultimately held to be true. Their defense did as much as they could, but even then, it was hard for anybody to stop Magoo.
I mean, because Troy's stats for that game for the Maulers, he was 24-47, 143 yards, 4 rushes for 38 yards. I mean, you're not going to win a championship game when your leading rushers, your QB, at 38 yards, and then he had less than 150 yards passing in the game. I mean, that's not going to get it done, which was vice versa with the Stallions. Magoo went 18-25, 243 yards, 4 passing touchdowns, and then another 64 rushing yards, getting over that 300-yard mark. I mean, that was pretty much the difference right there is the offensive play. One of the teams could move the ball and make plays when it mattered. The other team kind of got stifled at the line and had a lot of 3 and outs and had the costly 4th down. They went for it and didn't get it towards the 50-yard line with about 7 minutes to play in the 4th quarter. I mean, that was a backbreaking play right there. Because then the Stallions got it right at the 50-yard line, and that was when Magoo threw that was like the 40-something yard pass to Deion Kane in the right corner of the end zone, which brought it to the 28-12 final score, basically.
Yeah, and today we kind of got the ratings for that game,
Yeah,
and I'll let you give the number, and then I'll kind of give my point of view.
so we finally got over the $1 million mark. So for the NBC championship, it was $1.157 million. They've had one other game in the million mark this year, and that was following the Kentucky Derby. And we've been hovering around the 800 to 900,000 range these last few weeks of the season, and then in the playoffs. And then they finally got over that 1.1 million TV viewing rating for the championship game, which was solid numbers.
Yeah, they got about 1.2. It's kind of what I'd seen it as. I rounded up a little bit, about 1.2, which I think is solid for a couple of reasons. For one, I mean, Pittsburgh is not a small. It is a sports town, but it's not like Philly or Houston or Detroit or New York or LA. It's not one of these huge television markets, and neither is Birmingham. They're 2 of the smaller markets in the league technically.
And then the
Kind of.
game was
They're in
played in Canton. So, I mean, you had a lot of fans traveling. Last year, we had quite a little bit larger crowd in person, but this crowd was not bad. I mean, it was a solid crowd. It was loud. I mean, you heard the Maulers fans, you heard the Stallions fans. So it wasn't like it was like a low number crowd out there at the stadium. So
No, it was a solid crowd. And like I said, I think 1.2 million. I know it's down from last year, but also
was it
like I
last year was like 1.5, 1.6 was the championship viewing
yeah,
numbers
it was
last year.
1.5. But like I said, 2 smaller market teams, and NBC didn't do a whole lot of advertising for this game, not as much as Fox did last year with the championship game, and
We did have 2
also
good commentators, though, with Jason Garrett and Jack Collinsworth calling the
yeah,
game. I thought that was solid crew for the NBC side of
yeah.
things.
I love Jack Collinsworth. I don't think Jason's bad either. Some people aren't a fan of him, but I like Jason Garrett. He walked right in front of me actually when I was in the press box. It didn't even register in my head until he was already gone on his way. But
It was crazy when we were heading up to the press box in the elevator, and then opens the door, and there's Daryl Moose Johnson, CEO of the
right there.
league, right there in our face, shaking all of our hands, like had the biggest hands we've ever felt. It was
Great
crazy.
dude. Great dude. I love Moose. He's awesome. I'm glad he's the, as far as executives and whatnot, I'm glad he's the face of our league.
He is our Roger Goodell.
He is. And you know what? We don't boo that man. Roger gets booed, but Moose, we don't boo Moose. It may sound like it because we're yelling Moose, but no.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, like I was saying, they didn't advertise as much for that game. And also it was a Saturday on a holiday weekend. Last year's game was on a Sunday. I think it might be better to keep that championship game on a Sunday. Maybe not 8 p.m., but maybe if you can get the 7:30 on a Sunday, I think that's a good slot for a championship game. Just because Saturday, man, a lot of people, they're out, they're doing things.
4th of July weekend, so
yeah. But Sunday, most of the time, Sunday, people have done their weekend stuff, especially 4th of July weekend. They've done their weekend stuff. You know what I mean? They've went and had the cookouts and the barbecues and hung out with family, and then they come home on Sunday. And, they got maybe work the next day or something, and they're just like, all right, I'm going to relax. And they're
turn
like,
on
oh,
the TV.
there's a championship game I can just chill, relax, and watch before I go to bed. So, but we'll see what Fox does next year because
they're alternating. So Fox was last year, NBC was this year, so it'll be back on Fox for the championship game for season 3.
I think it's cool. That was probably part of the deal for NBC, but I think it's cool because it is still Fox's league, and Fox Sports does a lot or most of the behind the scenes stuff. So I think it's cool that they were like, hey, that's fine with us. Like we'll alternate. It's cool. So I think it's cool.
It's a good partnership. So
yeah,
I think it's good.
I love both networks. I think they both bring their own stuff. I think Fox brings good production, and they bring Joel Klatt, which I love Joel Klatt, and he gives great analysis. And I think NBC does a great job too with Jack Collinsworth, and they've got guys like Jason Garrett, like Michael Robinson. So I like both of them, man. Kevin Kugler on Fox is really good too, by the way. But anyway,
it was a fun experience all around that the USFL gave us the opportunity to have media credentials and to get to watch the game up close and personal. That was a cool experience.
Yeah, and one of my favorite things about it, man, anytime you go to a game like that and you get those media credentials, man, the coaches are cool. And even if you don't, I mean, the players literally were walking down to the field, like walking through the stands. And
we were talking to the defensive coordinator, Jaron Horton, before the game. We were talking to the players like Boogie and saying hi to some of them before.
Not only that, like the ramp that they were just walking down, like is literally where all the fans are. Like they, you know what I mean? And they could stop and talk if they wanted to and chill. And they, and that's just like one of my favorite things is how accessible a lot of these guys are, man, how cool they are. They're willing to talk to us, to fans. Doesn't matter. They're cool people. It's one of my favorite things, about this league. And
I mean, I went up and talked to Alex Magoo right after the press conference. So, I mean, and he MVP of the year of the league, probably going to the NFL. He was a super down-to-earth guy and, talked to me for a second, got a quick picture. And, I mean, that's what a lot of these players do. They really care about the fans because the fans are coming out to support them, and they're just ultimately trying to lay their bodies on the line to get to that next step. So that was really cool that they give back to the people that are supporting them.
Yeah. Yeah, they do a heck of a job, and they've done a heck of a job since year one. Players have been accessible since year one. They've been great. So it's one of my favorite things, man. It sets this league apart. It's hard to get a hold of NFL players and a lot of high level college players. So when you can, talk when you've got a guy on your team that's leading the league in rushing yards or receiving yards, and you can text him on Instagram or whatever, and they'll get back to you, like that's cool. You don't get that very often unless maybe you're a fan of a small school like FCS school or maybe a lower tier group of 5 school. You don't get that if you're an SEC fan or an NFL fan or a Big Ten fan or like what, you don't get stuff like that very often. So it's great. I love it. I love this league.
What
And
was your opinion on Deion King's performance getting a MVP in the championship? I mean,
it was, and it's something that I talked to RJ Young about in the post game press conference before everybody started coming in there.
because Deion had 4 receptions for 70 yards and 3 touchdowns. So, I mean,
and he had 101 kick return yards.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because, like, 4 touchdowns, compared to Magoo, because, Magoo had the 4 touchdowns and the 300 yards. But 3 of those touchdowns went to one guy. So, I mean, you got to give credit to the guy.
Which was crazy because coming in, Deion had 2? He had 2 kickoff returns for touchdowns, and then I think he had 1 or 2 receiving touchdowns in the year.
Yeah,
and I mean, he was not their main target majority of the year. It was Davion Davis or Jay Sternberger, but I mean, Deion Kane, he came out of nowhere and just lit up the Maulers defense. And like we talked about pre-show, they let a lot of balls go over their head from their defensive backs, and that's exactly what he did. He just ran past people, and Magoo just had the 2 deep passes to him for touchdowns. So
yeah, it was. I thought it was deserving. I thought you could have gone either way with him or Magoo, but I don't think anybody was mad that he got it.
Yeah, I mean, Magoo won league MVP, so I'm like, Deion got he can get the championship game. Maybe he had 3 touchdowns on 4 receptions, so
yeah, exactly.
He played a hell of a game.
Yeah, but I think it was a fun season. We got a little bit more parity, and even though we had a team win again, I still think it was a good thing for the league to see teams kind of get closer. Some teams kind of starting to figure out quarterback stuff. Because we had a lot of revolving doors last year.
Last year, every team I went through like 3 quarterbacks. It seemed like they were just
Yeah.
cutting guys, signing guys left and right, throwing people out there without any practice. This year, the QB play was significantly better, which made for, like you were saying, more parity in the league and better records.
Yeah, Houston kind of settled on a guy. New Orleans had their guy from the jump. Birmingham, they finally settled in on Alex Magoo after the injury. Memphis finally settled in on Cole Kelly.
Yeah, they gave the hometown Brady White an opportunity because he's from Memphis, so they gave him a shot. But Cole Kelly was the better option at quarterback.
Yeah. I mean, even up north, we had Michigan Michigan was with Love for most of the year, but they ended up switching it up. But other than that, Jersey, other than the injuries, for the most part, Jersey stuck with DeAndre Johnson when he was healthy.
Yeah.
Case Cookis was kind of always a guy in Philly, and Troy Williams kind of settled in, around week 2, 3, 4. He kind of settled in as the Pittsburgh guy. So, I mean, I think, going into next year, depending on, anything crazy happening, I think Magoo will probably go to the NFL.
I hope he does. I mean, he deserves it. I mean, that is good for – I mean, it's tough to lose a player that brings in views, but ultimately that's what, these spring leagues like the XFL, USFL, all these things are ultimately trying to do. These guys want to come here, put out good film, and then make it back to the NFL, which a lot of people started out as, whether they were on practice squads or they were on active rosters and for whatever reason got booted out of the league just for not getting enough opportunity. This league lets them get that film out there and ultimately try to get back to, the ultimate goal of playing in the NFL. So I hope he does go to the NFL.
Yeah, and I don't think I mean, he played super well, so it obviously
Yeah, we were talking. I mean, he ended the season with a 67.8 completion percentage, 2,656 passing yards with 28 passing TDs and a quarterback rating of 115, which is crazy for it being over 100 or 115 for a whole year. And then he had 551 rushing yards with another 6 rushing touchdowns. So he totaled out at 3,200 yards and 34 touchdowns on the year for 12 games. I mean, that's crazy good numbers.
Yeah. And even if, if you lose a guy like Magoo, they still got Jamar Smith that'll come back. Jamar was their guy most of their first championship run. And he's a guy that a lot of people know too. He was a starter going into the season, so it's not like he's some unknown backup. So
yeah,
I think even if they lose Magoo, I don't think it's the end of the world for the league or for Birmingham because they still got a guy behind them. And it'd be nice to have a guy go to the league and you can kind of, it's almost kind of like Taylor Heineke for a while where
Oh yeah, what Taylor Heineke was a backup in the XFL, not even a starter for the Battlehawks when he was Jordan Ta'amu's backup, and now he's made and just signed a $20 million contract this offseason with the Falcons. So I mean that's a crazy success story of a spring league football. So I mean, hopefully something like that. Maybe Alex will get a chance and get into actually playing a regular season game, and whatever happens at that point happens.
yeah,
We saw Heineke. He took it and ran with it, and now we got a $20 million contract. So I think
yeah,
it could easily
exactly.
happen for someone like Alex. Because personally, I think Taylor Heineke is a solid NFL player, but I don't think he's near as talented as Magoo was or is. So, I think it could happen if it was in the right opportunity and got in the game. I mean, I think he could stick around.
Yeah, I agree. But I think that pretty much kind of covered it. We pretty much went through the whole season. Talked about all the storylines and all that good stuff. So yeah, I mean that's pretty much all. That's pretty much all I got.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a long off season. We're gonna have plenty to talk about,
Yeah,
man.
we'll be on here talking about whenever there's coaching changes, if there's any of that, if there's any NFL signings, which we had our first confirmation, which was the Stallions kicker. Me and Logan were talking pre-show. It was Brandon Aubrey signed an NFL contract and voided his USFL contract. We just haven't seen the team name who he signed with. So I mean that would like me and Logan were talking about pre-show. Last year was about a 1 week after the championship game before we started seeing players sign on to NFL rosters. So we assume sometime by the end of this week or beginning of next week, we'll start seeing some more USFL names getting picked up for to get ready for training camp and stuff like that. For hopefully making the active 53 roster here soon.
Yeah, my guess, if I had to guess where he's going, would be the Cowboys, just because they had some kicking issues in the playoffs, and they also signed Cavante Turpin last year, like to a
Who
genuine.
was the USFL MVP last year?
Yeah,
So
they signed Turpin to like a 2 or 3 year deal, and like he was like genuinely a key contributor to their special teams. So there's already a little bit of a USFL connection there in Dallas, and like I said, they had some kicking issues in the playoffs. So that's my guess. If I had to guess a team, that would be mine.
I think that's a solid. I think this season the kicking game in the USFL was crazy good
Honestly,
comparative to last year.
that's
Like a
the
lot of these kickers are better than the NFL kickers this past year. I mean, Chris Blewett, I know he missed one field goal in the championship game, but he had a hell of a season for majority of the season. I think he missed like two field goal or two or three the whole year in 12 weeks. I mean, and for the Maulers, we already talked about it. He was kicking a lot of field goals for them. So I mean, they had, and then your breakers kickers, McLaughlin, right?
Matthew Coughlin.
Coughlin. Had a hell of a season, and then
He only missed one kick.
the whole year. So I'm like, the kicking game this season, the USFL was night and day for what it was
And that
last year.
was something too that they had to figure out last year was kicking. They had a revolving door of quarterbacks, and they also kind of had a revolving door of kickers last year in the USFL, and that's something that they also kind of figured out pretty much across the league. You know, there are some guys that miss some kicks here and there, but for the most part, the majority of the league was like solid enough to where you're like, at least we can keep this guy and not have to cut a guy every other week.
Yeah. Like you said, they were rotating a lot last year. And then I think, there was a lot of good punters this year too. I mean, the special teams in general as a whole, the kick returners were solid. I mean, Deion Kane had two returns for touchdowns. The punt returners were really good. I mean, Webb's guy, Simmons was really good. I know the Memphis Showboats, Derek Dillon. I mean, he had like 109-yard return touchdown. So the special teams in general was crazy good this year. And I think a lot of the special teams units will end up on NFL rosters because that's a premium in the NFL.
And I think that special teams is important in all football, but I think it might be most important in the USFL, like out of all the leagues. And not even saying that to be biased, but like it just makes such a huge difference. Like the kicking matters, the punting with field position, that stuff really matters. And even the kick returns, like you getting a solid kick return could be the difference between you literally going 3 and out and actually getting a field goal. Like, 'cause
Yeah, because
they get around midfield.
Yeah, the 40 and 50-yard line every kick, which is crazy field position. And I mean, that's how a lot of the Maulers touchdowns were this year, is because they got great returns in the kicking game, and that set up their short drives. Because, like we talked about earlier, their offense didn't have a whole lot of explosive passing plays in that specific offense, so they needed that punt return or kick return yardage to get short fields to get down there and score in position, rather than try to kick 40, 50-yard field goals, which was what Blewett was doing majority of the year. So, I mean, it's a premium in this league.
Yeah. Yeah. So we saw a lot of improvements in the league. We saw a lot of improvements, special teams, quarterbacks. Some of the defenses got a little bit better. So it was a really fun season, and it's probably going to be another crazy off season. So we'll keep you up to date on the fun stuff. We'll throw some theories at you. We'll throw some speculation at you. Might even throw some draft talk at you.
We'll break breaking news if new quarterbacks sign or if quarterbacks leave. I know that's what brings in a lot of views and attention. I'm a QB guy, so I'll be interested about if McLeod will be back, if Magoo will be back, if Case Cookus will be back. We'll be breaking news as soon as we get it to you guys, or as soon as we find out. We'll hop on YouTube and we'll get out a video for you all. And because we appreciate all the support we've had this year. It's been a crazy ride.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody that takes time to watch, takes time to like, to subscribe, just whatever it is, whatever you do, whether it, like I said, if you just view, if you throw a like on there, if you
leave a comment, it helps us out. It helps out the YouTube
whatever
algorithm.
it is, we're thankful.
But
we appreciate you guys. So that's
about it.
All I got. Yeah,
until next time, guys.
Yep. Peace out.
Until next time.